Good afternoon, everybody. We will get started here in just a couple of minutes. We're really glad you're here. Welcome and good afternoon. We're so glad you're here. And we will get started here in just a couple minutes. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and say hello if you'd like to do that too. Let us know where you're signing in from. We're always curious to know that. Linwood, awesome. Welcome, Jacob. Courtney, I get to introduce you. I can't wait to do that. I prepared something potentially very embarrassing, but.
No, do it.
Cindy, glad to have you from Kansas City. Welcome, everyone. Let us know where you're coming in from. We're going to get started in here just a minute. Wakarusa. All right, Robin, glad to have you here. Baldwin City, yeah, Morgan, I know where you're from. I know where to find you. Morgan's on our staff. I'm only give people on our staff a hard time. Kansas City, great. So glad you're here. Topeka, great. Rachel, glad you're here. Welcome, welcome. And I'm going to give it one more minute to let folks get in. We had a lot of folks registered for today, and hopefully we'll have a lot more joining us. And in the meantime, please say hello and let us know where you're joining us from. Good afternoon, everybody. Good rainy afternoon here in where I'm sitting right now. And Courtney and I were just talking about how much we need the rain, but it might be kind of nice if we could get out and do some stuff too. So, Barrington, great show. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to say, absolutely. It'd be nice to be outside playing today. But I can talk about things you could be doing with seeds today. So it'll give you something to do.
Well, I think we'll go ahead and get going, and we'll let folks in as they get in. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Downey. I'm the director for the Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education, and we are super happy to have you here for our March virtual monthly event. We co-sponsor these events with the Missouri Environmental Education Association, and we do them every month, and we're super happy this month to have really fun and exciting presentation on native prairie seed collecting and saving. We did a little poll with folks, and you all said this was like top at your list, so we were super glad to be able to do that. I know, isn't that exciting?
Great.
And I do want to make sure that we acknowledge our sponsor for this event, which is the Grassland Heritage Foundation. They work a lot with Courtney, but we appreciate them sponsoring this event and helping to get the word out about the event. And the Grassland Heritage Foundation is a great organization. If you're not familiar with them, we encourage you to become familiar with them and the great work that they're doing on conserving and preserving our prairies here in the state of Kansas. So it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you Courtney Masterson with Native Lands LLC. There's Courtney in her native habitat. out in the prairie doing what she does best, and we're super excited to have her with us today and sharing with us about native plant seed collecting. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to see a bunch of familiar faces, but also a bunch of new folks here. I've been doing native plant education in Kansas City and Lawrence for over a decade now. I know I look young, but I'm older than I look. But I'm really excited to share this topic with you today, and it's very deep. It's very broad. So I'm really scratching the surface here, but if you have questions, consider the door open at this point. Laura certainly knows how to get a hold of me, but you can find me by Googling Native Lands LLC and reaching out to me through one of our social media pages or via email. So I'm going to start with some slides and then switch over to videos and then switch back over to slides, probably if the technology works well. I'm pretty informal. I'm going to let Laura be in charge of corralling the masses. But if you have a question, do put it in the chat, or I'm not terribly opposed to unmuting and asking if it's not going to be a big, long question, if it's a clarification question. Okay, great. I'm going to try this share screen thing. Laura, let me practice before you got here. Let's see how it goes. Okay. That would be good if I was at the beginning. Okay, so everybody can see my slides. Great. I'm going to start just because I do have a great appreciation for the arts. And I just want you to know that if a photo in my slides was taken by someone else, I did try to provide credit for that. If I missed it, I'll try to catch it while I'm presenting the slide. But otherwise, a lot of these are my photos. And it's a hobby that I really enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions about them. So today we'll talk about native seeds, how to collect them, how to clean them, how to germinate them, and certainly, sort of the sustainable practices that surround each of those aspects of native seeds. As Laura mentioned, I own and operate Native Lands LLC. We are an ecological restoration organization. We don't look like anything else, so it's difficult for me to sort of compare us to similar organizations, but we focus heavily on community education and doing restoration of landscapes driven by community volunteerism and student involvement. Everything's really educational. And certainly we work with private landowners as well. And I know some of you folks on the call are some of our clients, and thank you for being here. And that's always driven by education as well. Our goal is for landowners to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, but certainly to be educators themselves and to work with other landowners in management of landscapes, because it's difficult to do on your own. I also teach field botany for KU. And my course is all field-based and project-based learning. And specifically, they are required to do service projects at the end of the class where they teach botany to other folks, teachers, students, and community members. So I really love teaching that class. Maybe some of you can join me. I'm certainly open to auditing or visitors for that class as well. So I'm going to share a series of videos that my partner Ryan helped me shoot just this week as we anticipated the rainy day. But you probably already know there's an awful lot of native species in Kansas, native plant species. There's over 2,000 native plant species in Kansas. And they make up several different plant families and even more plant genera. And so to be able to share how to do seed collecting and cleaning for everything that you're going to find out in the prairie would be impossible in a slideshow. But I will be able to share some of the beauty and diversity of native seeds with you. And those videos will give you some nice concrete examples of how to collect and clean some of the more well-known native prairie species in northeastern Kansas. And you can probably read between the lines and tell that collecting seeds, growing seeds, certainly teaching people about collecting, storing, and using seeds is a huge passion of mine. And it's not something that's new. This is a very, very ancient practice. It's been very meaningful and life sustaining for peoples all over the world since we were a people. And certainly I'm always learning. So be patient with yourself and consider yourself always a student in the practice of collecting native seeds. I want to go over a lot of these more concrete and academic topics on the process of collecting, storing, cleaning native seeds after the videos. So I'm going to try to flip over to my videos now. Let's see. And Laura, I'm going to depend on you to tell me if I did it right. Here, hold on. Okay, sharing screen. Here we go. Oh, I might have done it without hitting that sound button. Let me know if you can't hear this.
Hi, my name's Courtney Masterson, and I'm going to talk to you today about native seeds. And it's a little late in the year to start thinking about growing native plants, which seems crazy because it's the end of March. Today's the first day of spring, but a lot of native plant seeds need to be in cold conditions all winter to germinate. Plants like this one, this little sweetie here, this is Virginia bluebells, Mertensia virginica, and they need quite a bit of cold to germinate. Luckily, they're perennial, so they come back every year, and that's what you're seeing in the background here is our native plant production area for native lands, our business that restores and protects native landscapes like prairies and woodlands in the northeast Kansas region. Hi. So as I was saying, on the other side of the plant production area, this is the space that we overwinter our plants for our restoration projects, and we start our seeds in another space. But I wanted to share a few of the awakening plants with you before we take a walk on the prairie. We're really excited to get out there with you. It's so windy. I'm going to get closer to the camera. So here's a rattlesnake master that's waking up for the year. Rattlesnake master is Eryngium yuccifolium, and I know there's seeds out on the prairie, so I'll share them with you later. Here's another really wonderful plant that's waking up. This is wild columbine, something you would find at the edge of the woods in the prairie. The Latin name is Aquilegia canadensis. Look at these beautiful blue-green leaves. They're really cool, sort of hydrophobic, so the water beads on the leaves. Really easy to start from seeds, and they actually spread really well from seeds. So if you can get a few of these plants in your garden, you can collect and share seeds. And it's a great way to make more native plants. Here's another really cool one that we got ready to share. Look at this beautiful babe. This is elderberry. Really easy to start from seeds too, though of course they're a berry. And you can't let berries dry out if you're going to grow a plant that has berries containing their seeds. So you want to get those berries straight into medium and don't let them dry out. I'll talk more about germinating different types of native seeds later in the session. Let's go out on the prairie. This really cool plant is the leftover stems, the senesced stems from the rattlesnake master from last year. So you remember the rattlesnake master in the previous video. To collect these, you should probably wear gloves. I have a lot of experience collecting them, so I've learned how to hold them just right. But if I wasn't experienced at it, or even if I was more prepared, I might bring gloves. You can cut the stems off and clean them inside later, or if you're wearing nice sturdy gloves and they're really dry, you can just grab some off of the stem. Most folks don't need enough seeds to have to collect bags and bags of these, so unless you're volunteering to help a nonprofit or a prairie building organization collect seeds, you probably only need as much as I've got in my hand. You can see they're sticking out of my thumb. They're pretty sharp. The seeds of these, rattlesnake master, or Eryngium yuccifolium, which means yucca foliage. Look at how rotted right out of the ground. See how the foliage looks a lot like a yucca leaf, and it's so strong. This is a really important fiber plant for indigenous folks, but also, why not today? We could be using this as a fiber plant now. The seeds of rattlesnake master look to me like little dinosaur feet. Let me find a good seed for you. Oh, here's one. I'm just throwing those seeds right back on the ground. So there's some toes. It looks kind of like a flattened sunflower seed. I almost messed it up, but you saw it anyway. Can you believe that deafening frog song? It's amazing. This is one of the ponds on the property that we just adore, and it gives us another space to produce seeds for a different ecosystem. So even man-made, people-made ponds can emulate wetlands at the edges. So it's a great place to use wetland seeds if you collect them out on with permission on someone's property. But I wanted to stop here and show you the echinacea seed heads. So you'll see the seed heads all year, really. If you don't burn the space, the seed heads persist. But what's happened is the birds, especially goldfinches, have gotten down and in between each of these spiky bracts and taken the seed out. We want to be careful while we're collecting seeds not to disturb the wildlife that might be interacting with these stems too. So these have hollow stems. When I was twisting the seed head to show it to you, it shattered the stem, and there could certainly be bees inside of these. Many of our native bees live inside of hollow stems over the winter, and they have not emerged yet. I don't see any bees in this one, but you might see little holes in the stems where bees have entered the stem and laid eggs, and we want to leave those undisturbed to support our native bees. So these seed heads were pretty much empty, but check out this one, if I can get Ryan over here to help me out. So the birds worked this side of the seed head. See how bald it is there? But if I rotate it, can you see those little white spots? Those are the seeds. Let's see if I can get them out. The seeds look sort of like a half of a sunflower seed. Can you see those there? And if you're feeling particularly brave, you can eat them, shell and all, seed coat and all. It's sort of like eating a small sunflower seed. But what's cool about echinacea seeds is they also contain the medicinal compounds that you'd find in the echinacea root. And you've probably heard of echinacea as sort of a heal-all medicine. The seeds are great because they taste really herbal and they make your mouth numb. They're really good for if you have sores in your mouth or your gums are swollen, or even honestly if you have a virus or you want to protect against illness. Echinacea seeds are really good for you, and they're kind of neat to try out in the field. I probably shouldn't eat too many of them. The goldfinches will be mad. Very cool seed though. So this species is called slender mountain mint, or in Latin, Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. So when they're growing actively, they have very slender leaves. It almost looks sort of ferny is the way people describe it from a distance. But if you crush the foliage, it's really minty, kind of pepperminty. And you can see from the stems from last year that this is an upright growing mint, not like the mints that we buy at most of the plant nurseries that'll hop along the ground and grow sort of aggressively through spread of their root system. These will volunteer stems, but they are so delicious you'll probably eat quite a bit of them. But to collect the seeds off of these, you can collect all these stems, take them inside. It's a good thing to do while you're listening to a podcast or watching one of these cool e-courses. I don't know if we'll be able to zoom. So each grouping of flowers is actually several different inflorescences. Each of these holes is one flower. Can you see that?
to get the seeds out of them, you just flip them over and gently twist them, and the seeds will fall out. Look at these tiny little black dots. Oh, still minty. These itty bitty pepper flakes are slender mountain mint seeds. These don't really need cold to germinate, and many of the mint family plants don't. So that's one of the ways you can get around not quite thinking ahead when you get excited about planting native plants. You can use things from the mint family, and a lot of the legumes, the native prairie legumes, don't need very much cold either. I'll see if I can find one out in the field. But here's our little mint seeds, very cool. One of my favorite seeds to collect are milkweed seeds, and these are the seed pods of common milkweed. You can tell because they have these spiky protrusions on the seed pod. So these are open, they've peeled back, and what it reveals are seeds on their transportation device, essentially these feathers. So you can watch milkweed seeds fly away, which is one of my favorite parts of milkweed seeds. Or you can collect the seeds. There was a bunch of beetles in this pot. Here, I'm going to get Ryan to come back down. So these milkweed beetles are consuming the seeds. That's their job, so share with them. They are a native beetle, good bird food. But if I wanted to collect these seeds, I would hold on to these feathers, shake the bugs off, and then you can just rub the seeds off into your hand like this. So I've got my seeds. Or if you're just trying to help the milkweed disperse, then you can let it go. They're really great at traveling. We see these days and days after we disperse milkweed seeds, just floating around. And this species of milkweed is the monarch butterfly's preferred host plant, though they'll use any of the milkweed plants. Common milkweed has been shown through research to be their favored species. They also really like swamp milkweed. So you would take these seeds in and either cold stratify them in the fridge, and I'll talk about that. Hey Goose. Or you will sow them directly outside where they can get 60 days of cold, moist stratification. And that's going to increase their germination rate significantly. I'm just going to toss these back out. Here's another cool find. We were walking around our prairie looking for spaces that the fire had skipped over, which is really wonderful in nature. You can always find a little oases for wildlife and certainly seeds after a prairie fire. So this plant is purple prairie clover, or Dahlia purpurea. And to collect these out in nature, you just grasp the stem and pull. Oop, that one just popped off. But you can see how easy it is to clean them. So this is one of our native legumes. They only need a few days of cold, but they do need to be scarified. And that means gently buff them with some sandpaper, or there's all kinds of ways to do this. You could certainly sort of get some sand and rub the sand and the seeds around, let the sand do the work. But the seed, let's see if I can get one of them out. The seeds are tiny, glossy seeds. They're almost just a little bit bigger than a flax seed. And they're hiding in all of this fluffy seed coat. But you can collect these pretty easily out in the field. And they're fantastic for wildlife, certainly. The whole plant is edible. They're beautiful. They're purple flowers that bloom from the bottom up, and it looks a little bit like a hula skirt. It's really beautiful. So these you could collect any time of the year, but I wouldn't expect very many of them to be hanging around. As I said, they're really good food for birds and rodents. I don't eat these seeds, but I certainly eat the leaves and the flowers of this plant during the growing season. And here in this same oasis, I'm seeing seeds for blazing star, which you just kind of grab by the feathers and pull off, but see the seeds attached to the feathers here. Let's see if we can get that focused. Whoop, without them flying away. So here's a single seed. Oh nope, that's two seeds still.
These are dispersed by wind, but also really nutritious for birds. So birds will eat them and carry them around. Oh, and check this out. So the fire did carry through this space, but look at how the stem of the rattlesnake master burned off. It's over there, but the seed head is still here, and the seeds are still here, and they're in pretty good shape. Just the tips of them got burned. So this is one of the ways nature is helping this plant move through the prairie. If historically there certainly would have been fires fairly often through the prairie, and a stem stout like a rattlesnake master stem would have burned and then tipped over, allowing the seeds to disperse. The distance of the plant is tall away from that mother plant. And there's quite a few seeds here, so I'm going to help them out and disperse them. Very cool. Okay, so I hope that the audio wasn't too quiet. And like I said, I don't know how KACEE feels about it, but I can certainly share those videos for folks to access at another time. But I'm going to switch back to my slides. Here we go. Okay. Oop. I have to. Here we go. Okay. So those were just a few examples of the, like I said, thousands of species that you'd be collecting in a prairie space or woodland space. And that's sort of step one is what do you need? How much of it do you need? And how do you collect it sustainably without, offending any landowners or potentially harming any wildlife? And so when it comes to how many seeds do you need, that's a difficult question to ask a gardener. We're certainly all, sort of plant passionate. And I'm a little bit of a seed hoarder, to be honest. And that's okay as long as you are sitting in recognition that plant seeds are alive. They're not inanimate. It's not like you're saving sand or rocks or something that even they could have living organisms on them, certainly. But seeds have a determinate lifespan, and they only have so much food in that package to survive. And that lifespan of a seed is going to be different by species. So some seeds like the alliums, like the wild onions, their seeds live for a very short period of time. And then there's other seeds like compass plant that have been found in archaeological sites that are many hundreds or thousands of years old and will still germinate. And that's true of many different genera of plants. So they all have a different tactic when it comes to survival. And when it comes to how many you need, it's going to be a little different than your typical gardening scenario. Most native plants that are collected in the wild will have a fairly low germination rate, something like 25-30% is normal for wild collected seed. And so you want to collect a little more than you think you need, but certainly not more than you need yourself or for whatever project you're working on. Like I said in the videos, I'm certainly part of several different groups that collect seeds for large projects. It's great to learn in those groups. Groups like Kansas City Wildlands or our restoration projects with Grassland Heritage Foundation, and GHF does their own seed collecting on top of that outside of our restoration projects. So you can learn from these folks in a hands-on way. That's a little different than the way you're learning today. And that 20-30% rule that I have on my slide refers to how much of the seed you should collect in an area. So when I came upon that echinacea, for instance, by our pond, in that space, there's probably 10 to 20 stems of echinacea there. I don't want to collect everything I can find for a lot of reasons, but certainly because the survival of that species is really important to me in that space. This is a remnant prairie. That means it's always been prairie, and I certainly don't want to harm that prairie by trying to produce my own native plants. And that's going to be true of pretty much any native space you're going to collect seeds. And you
your gardens are a really great place to collect seeds, and we can talk more about that as well. But it's always better to collect from spaces that are created. If this is a hobby of yours and you're not producing another prairie, than it is to go into a remnant and collect seeds. You should be part of a group that's well-informed and has a specific mission if you're going into a remnant to collect. So I could share all day pictures of plant to seed with you of different species. This is a really beautiful milkweed species. It's like a slender leafed milkweed. And they have these really interesting blooms. And then you can see that there's a milkweed pod in the photo to the right, and they look very different than common milkweed pods. And that's one of the ways I can tell what species of milkweed I'm collecting from once the leaves have fallen off of the plant. The best way to learn native seed identification is to spend time with those plants all season. So go back and visit the same stems, flag them with biodegradable marking tape. You can buy that at your local hardware store usually. And then there's some guides as well. These are 3 that I keep on the shelf and I tell people to refer to. They're really affordable. There are not very many prairie seed guides. And that's one of my lifetime goals. One of my long-term goals is to produce a really nice seed guide for our region. But the bottom 2 here are both books by Dave Williams. And they're not so distant from us that the seeds they're collecting are very different from our prairie seeds. They're just north of us. And the Missouri Department of Conservation prints and produces the seedling ID guide on the right. And yes, it is a seedling ID guide, but there's also some really nice photos of seeds in there. And that one's really affordable. It's less than $10. I think the last time I checked it out, and I think you can order it through the MDC website. I'm not going to go heavy into what are the parts of a seed, but the reason I go into it is because it's important to understand what a seed coat is before you do stratification and scarification, I mean. And also how seeds are dispersed. So we'll talk about that too. But so a seed coat is going to be found on essentially all seeds, but the thickness of that seed coat is going to vary by seed. And as pictured here on the right, that's one of our native wild indigo seed pods, most likely wild blue indigo, which is Baptisia australis. And they have the indigos and the other legumes have really thick seed coats. And I'll talk about scarification here in a few slides, but you can absolutely let nature germinate seeds on its own. There's no one in nature buffing seeds with sandpaper. That's just something we do. And the reason we do that is to increase the germination rate, but also to shorten that germination time, because it can take, years to get through a seed coat like that. I'm guessing most of you could come up with an example of how seeds move through nature. This is one of those ways here on the left. One of our volunteers covered in desmodium seeds. Desmodium are just gorgeous prairie legumes and woodland legumes, but they like to hitchhike on our clothes, on our shoes. They're harmless, but they're annoying. That's just one way, a biotic way of dispersing seeds. And that means that some living organism is helping you move. So certainly sticking to our fur or our clothes is one way, but also consuming seeds. And that's going to be, berries and nuts and other sorts of edible plant parts. That's how seeds end up passing through us and moving around. And before we were around, certainly animals were doing that work. The milkweed seeds, and certainly, dandelion seeds, we've all blown wishes on dandelions. Those are wind dispersed seeds. There's an awful lot of plants that depend on wind to disperse seeds. Water is one that we don't see as much here in Kansas, but if you visit a wetland several times and keep your eyes on some of those species, they're absolutely water dependent for seed dispersal. And then maybe my favorite way for seeds to disperse is this dehissing or drying and bursting action of some of the really cool seeds in our prairies, like the violets, jewelweed, which is a wild impatient, there's just so many cool examples. Oh, the celandine poppies do this, dry and burst and shoot your seeds several feet into nature. It's a really cool way to find new spaces to grow. Plants are very inventive that way. This is just a slide to prompt me to say, you should never be collecting seeds without permission. And I know that this is something that we've probably all dabbled in, stopping on roadsides, grabbing seeds, from gardens and parks, or when you're walking along, paths or trails. It seems innocuous when it's just you doing it, but certainly it's happening over and over and over again by people visiting those spaces. It's important to know that it's okay to collect those seeds. And honestly, the seeds are food. If you think of seeds as food for wildlife and you take all of them, then you've taken from their ability to survive. So you have to kind of think sustainably through this whole process. Another way we can protect wildlife when we're collecting seeds is to try not to disturb wildlife that are using those plants. So I pointed out with the echinacea stems that you would find native bees in hollow stems in nature. 30% of our native bees, so that's 30% of, I think 500 species, is how many bees use hollow stems in nature in Kansas alone. And the rest of almost all of the rest, not quite all of them, 70% or so of the native bees to our state live in the ground alone. So trying not to disturb your soil is a really important component of native gardening. But when you're collecting seeds, you only want to collect the portion of the plant that you need. So I wouldn't cut that echinacea stem down at the ground. I would cut it up closer to the seed head itself. And leave as much of that stem for wildlife as I can. And again, not collecting more seed than I need. And even in your garden spaces where you're going to see wildlife using your native plants, and sometimes it's a little frustrating, like these milkweed beetles. They suck the sap out of your milkweed pods and they eat your milkweed seeds. Monarch caterpillars will eat milkweed pods and seeds. Aphids will sort of suck all of the life out of milkweed pods, but we need to allow things like that to happen. The whole point of these spaces is to support wildlife, and you can be frustrated with them, but give them their space. And if it's your garden, plant more in the future so you have some for you and some for them. Cleaning seeds is almost as difficult to describe to folks as identifying seeds in the field, because each seed's going to require something a little bit different. You can attend seed cleaning events from a lot of the nonprofits I was mentioning. I cleaned seeds with Kansas City Wildlands for 7 or 8 years before I felt confident enough to try to lead my own work days cleaning seeds. And now we do seed cleaning work days with Grassland Heritage Foundation. You're typically going to see these sort of seed cleaning events in December or January, which is sort of downtime for seed collectors. We start collecting seeds in the prairie, in May, June, and it goes the entire year. And I shot those videos just a couple days ago or yesterday. This week, and there's still seeds hanging out in the prairie, so you don't really have to stop collecting seeds, but at some point give yourself a break. There's so much work to do. But I do recommend, if you're going to be cleaning a lot of seeds, that you look at making or purchasing some seed cleaning screens, which is really just wood frames that secure different size metal screens, and even like window screen for itty bitty seeds. And you can see in this center picture, it's more like hardware cloth for chicken coops is what I use for cleaning things like echinacea and rattlesnake master. And nesting those seed cleaning screens help you to clean the chaff out of the seeds, but you don't really need to worry so much about perfection. Remember that these seeds are going back out into nature. Unless you're going to sell the seeds, having dead plant material in there with your seeds is not a problem. You're really just breaking them down so you get good seed to soil contact. We disperse our seeds in nature whenever we possibly can. We are in the business of growing up native plants for restoration work. So we do seed quite a few trays and artificially cold stratify seeds as well. But really the best thing you can do for a seed is get it right back out into nature. And we try to coach our clients and our students into dispersing seeds underneath or during a snowstorm, so that you can get the seeds integrated into the soil through the freeze thaw action that happens over the winter, but also because that snow will hide the seeds for a period of time from birds and mice and other granivores, seed eaters that are interested in this delicious food that you're throwing all over the place. The seeds for native wildflowers generally are going to need some amount of cold to break their dormancy, to germinate. And that can be anywhere, honestly, from a week for most of the legumes to multiple years. So native roses require 2 winters to germinate. It's kind of frustrating, but it's wonderful too when you think of all the intricacy of relationships going on in nature. And how much work it takes to build little prairie spaces. You can germinate inside with, by a lot of gardeners do this already, by using sort of a wet paper towel and a Ziploc method in your refrigerator. We also do this in Tupperwares because you would go through a lot of Ziplocs if you were doing what we do. When I'm doing it in a container like a Tupperware, I would mix the seeds with sand or soil so that they're not sitting in a puddle of water. And then I would seed trays and either grow them under a grow light or take them outside and let them finish up their cold stratification outside. So I borrowed this image from the American Meadows website. I think it's really nice. It shows how much moisture should really be in your medium when you're putting them in the fridge. It really should just be enough moisture that whether it be sand or soil will hold its shape. And then you're putting it in the fridge. Make sure you write the date on your Ziploc bag and do some research on how long that plant should be cold stratified. The Prairie Moon Nursery website, they're based out of Minnesota, is a fantastic resource for finding information on specific prairie species and how long they need to be cold to germinate. I definitely recommend visiting their website. And certainly some of our more local organizations like Deep Roots KACEE, Botanical Belonging, and Grassland Heritage Foundation will post information on seed germination as well. So stay tuned into those folks. And the seeds that we have that are extra, we like to donate. So we donate a lot of seeds to Lawrence Public Library for their seed library. We also donate to local farms. So if you're part of a nonprofit or a community organization, neighborhood association that is interested in seeds but doesn't have the means to purchase enough for your project, please do reach out to us. We do that sort of purge at sort of the end of February every year. And sometimes we're still kind of trickling them out right now, to be honest. But these are the seeds we create prairies with. And so our seeds are wild collected seeds. You can also get seeds locally from Missouri Wildflower Nursery, and Buffalo Seed Co. sells native lands collected seed. And the reason that it's important to buy your seeds locally is because you're going to be receiving plant material that's the genetics that are most appropriate for your site. So I actually discussed this in a little bit greater detail on the Lawrence Public Library podcast, Oranges and Peaches. If you're particularly interested in this topic, you can listen to that. I just listened to it today and it's kind of fun. But the reason you want local genetics is because let's just pick a species at random. Echinacea, so the pale purple coneflower that grows in my prairie is the same species as the pale purple coneflower that grows up in Wisconsin. But the individual population in Wisconsin is not going to be used to our dry, hot summers. They're going to be more acclimated to cooler, wetter summer. what they experienced in their home population site. And so while those are the same species and they will interbreed, one of them is not as equipped to do well in your garden space or your prairie as the other. So try to use plant materials and plant seeds that are grown or sourced as close to you as possible. And I try to use that less than 100 miles if I can get it, and just bump out slowly as I have to. Definitely check out these seed vendors. They'll do their best to help you out, or tell you where to go if they can't help you. I would love to talk to you folks about your seed questions. So I saved a little bit of time here, but thank you so much for your patience with my technology.
The technology was great, Courtney. That's awesome. And I'm sure that I am recording this. So not only will the folks who are on here be able to go back and take a look at the videos and maybe turn the volume up louder than they might have normally if they need to, but also anybody else who had to miss out today but was really interested in this will be able to take a look as well. We did have like a question from Beverly in here in the chat. What is the lifespan of echinacea seeds?
I would expect that they would live for a couple of years. You wouldn't want to push them too far. A lot of those seeds with a lot of fatty tissue, like the echinaceas and the sunflowers, that fatty tissue is endosperm, and that's the food that the embryo inside of that seed is eating. And it can only survive for so long on that fatty tissue. And you'll be able to sort of tell if you break open one of the seeds and look for that tissue. If it's starting to dry out, your seeds are getting too old. Some folks get around that by soaking their seeds to add a little bit more moisture to them and give them a better chance of germinating, but certainly you wouldn't want to repeat that process. So I would say a good starting rule for most native species is that they would do well on a shelf, a cool, dry space without mice for about a year. And for like the example I gave of the compass plant seeds, some of them can handle quite a bit longer, like most of the native grasses are shelf stable for a lot longer. I try to get them cycled out though. You can always collect more next year.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions? I have one while we're waiting. Like, what got you started and interested in prairie restoration and seed collecting in particular?
So many things, honestly, but I really do, when I have to pinpoint it, it was professors I had in college recommending that I volunteer with Kansas City Wildlands. I do attribute who I am to my work with Wildlands, and specifically Linda Lehrbaum was a fantastic mentor to me, and remains a wonderful friend. But the work that they do just really spoke to my heart, and it was a way for me to feel like I was going out every day and making a real difference, which is difficult as an academic. You do a lot of research and you do all this stuff, jump through all these hoops to try to publish papers and to build community, but ultimately you're not able to go out into the world for the most part and make a real boots on the ground difference. So I ended up going that route, despite spending a lot of time in school. I think that both of those pathways really, really made me who I am, really helped form my work and my passion.
Awesome. So we're getting some questions in the chat, and I'll just read them to you so you can focus on responding. So Annie would love to know what the first step is to prepare a grass lawn for native seed planting.
Good question. There's a lot of different ways to prepare a site, and everybody's got a different comfort zone. So you can go sort of no chemical all the way to using a chemical treatment, a grass herbicide, a specific selective grass herbicide. I'm going to be specific about that because you don't need to go full broad spectrum herbicide when you're doing things like that. So you could either smother the space with, I use dark colored tarps or plastic. I have found clear plastic not to be helpful, but everybody has their own opinion there. Or you can put down cardboard and weigh it down. You could put mulch over it if cardboard is not going to pass the HOA's expectations. Or I wouldn't recommend tilling. A lot of folks till. If it's a little space, that's fine. But if you're tilling a larger space, you're going to see a lot of soil erosion, and certainly you're flipping your soil organic material underground and disrupting this sort of soil horizon. So I would do a non-soil disturbing method. And then herbicide work, there's a few different types of grass herbicides. We use clethodim, but go to your local hardware store and see what you can find there, but just sparing, you're going to have to repeat that process more than once. And then I would just seed it over the winter. That's going to be the easiest way. If you're able to plug in some live plants as well to jumpstart the process, that's a good idea too, just to make it pretty sooner.
Thank you. That was helpful. And is planting native grass in the soil, David's asking, is planting native grass in the soil better than scattering seed on the surface?
So you're asking, should I cover the seed? So there's all sorts of rules about seeds, but I don't think of them as rules so much as suggestions. So prairie seed, you can drill prairie seed, you can rake it in, you can decide, depending on the size of the area, you can scuff it in with your fingers. But one of the reasons I really like to seed in a snow is that the freezing and thawing of the soil actually does that work for you. Mm-hmm. So when soil freezes, it expands, right? And when it thaws, it contracts. And so you're creating these chasms for seeds to fall into. It's actually really cool. And if there's a snow blanket on top of it, that chasms are happening under the snow, and the moisture is also going down into the soil. So it's preparing those seeds for spring. But we do a lot of raking seeds in very, very gently. They don't need to go down deep. Or you can, if you're doing a really big site, hiring someone with a seed drill, for the seeds that need to be in the ground is a good idea. And then the tiny, tiny seeds should not be drilled and should not be raked in. They should just be dispersed over the top of the soil. So the larger your seed, the deeper it needs to be in the soil. The tinier it is, the more that it really needs to be exposed to sunlight and not be down under the soil at all.
Great. I didn't know that. So Michael would like to know, how do you seed on slopes? Do you use any growing medium or erosion control?
Good question. Slopes are tricky. Absolutely, if you can put erosion control medium in place, so whether it be wattle or we use geotextiles like jute fabrics that you can place on the ground. And all they do is just catch those seeds before they run down the slope, for folks unfamiliar with that. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can also, if you've herbicided the site, which I know isn't everybody's favorite thing. If you herbicide the site, that stubble that's left over from the dead grass actually acts as really nice erosion control as well. So leave that stubble in place to catch your seeds.
And then a couple of questions from Cheryl and Joe around germination. Cheryl wants to know about purple prairie clover, and she planted it after it was in the fridge between paper towel and an airtight container about 2 weeks, not having much success with germination. And then Joe is asking about, do you have any suggestions for germinating milkweed? I have terrible results.
Okay, so purple prairie clover is one of those legumes that would need to be scarified. It doesn't seem like they would need it because they're so soft, but their seed coat is underneath that soft outer tissue on its itty bitty seed, and they're really hard to scarify without hurting them. But I would recommend scarifying if you're not. And then I don't know how long you've been waiting, but sometimes they just take a while. If you really have no luck, I would, get them outside sooner, put some sort of protection around them so birds don't eat them, and then let nature do it. It does take a little bit of time with some of the legumes because that seed coat is just so tough. Milkweed seeds, because of monarch conservation work, there's so many cool tricks on germinating milkweed. Some folks do like a hot water method, which Google it. I don't do that. I'm too afraid. A lot of folks do it though with wet paper towels. I know folks who just dump them into a cup of water and put them on the windowsill and they'll germinate. It's really interesting. Absolutely. I see Morgan talking about the milk jug method. That's how I do most of my cold stratification because I'm particularly lazy. Look up, if you Google winter sowing, milk jugs is one of the ways. I tend to not use milk jugs very much. We don't drink a lot of milk, but also because it's opaque plastic or semi-opaque plastic. You want to use clear plastics for your winter sowing containers. So I more often use like a lettuce clamshell from the produce section, or clear soda bottles or clear juice bottles. And you're just creating drainage through the bottle. All that winter sowing terrarium is letting you let nature do the work, but protect your seeds so the birds can't get them. So it's just a clear container that's cut open. You drill drainage in the bottom of the container, fill it with soil, put your seed in the soil, and then close that container and tape it shut, and then put it outside. So you want those seeds to experience exactly what nature is doing, but not lose them to mice and birds. And that's honestly, that's a little more foolproof way than anything I try inside. But do Google milkweed seed germination. It's crazy how many YouTube videos there are for that species or the genera.
Awesome. Are there any other questions for Courtney? There's so much really great information, Courtney. We really appreciate your knowledge and expertise. And I thought the videos were super cool because it was a really interesting way to do a presentation on Zoom so that we could all see what you were looking at without being out in the field with you. But I hope that everybody gets a chance at some point to go out with Courtney, including myself, because I've heard that you're just amazing to wander around with out in the prairie. So,
well, I really enjoy it. And I hope everyone can join me too sometime. There's lots of events coming up this year. And I know Laura and Morgan both know how to get a hold of me. Please don't hesitate. I try to be easy to talk to, and I can always find a way to get outside together. So thank you all so much.
Well, thank you. If we don't have any other questions, then we'll remind you to join us next month. Morgan, what is our topic next month? Sorry, I should have known that.
Putting me on the spot, Laura.
Sorry. Well, while she's doing that, thank you so much, Courtney. And I put Courtney's Facebook for Native Plants LLC. Follow her there, and she always shares all these really great events that she's participating in, and so does the Grassland Heritage Foundation too, if you're interested in it. And yeah, our awards of banquet on April 1st, so join us if you can. So thank you, everybody. Thanks especially to you, Courtney, and have a great rest of your day, all.
Thank you very much.
Anybody who's here, it's Discovering Dandelions next month.
Discovering Dandelions.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to come to that one.
Local folk herbalist. So her name's Prairie, and she's awesome. It'll be a good one.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.